I wanted to create a series of paintings that focused on paper dolls. And then when I started to do some of the paintings, I realized that it began to represent so much more. Right now, in 2020, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and there's a need for us wearing masks to protect ourselves. So in a way, these paper dolls are symbolizing that as well. With the China marker, I'm able to define the drawing that I had previously put there and make it more permanent. That way I can paint over it and still follow some line. I make sure it's sharp at all times, and I even kept a couple of different black pencils with me just to make sure I can switch off when I needed to while I was doing the drawing over. It's a good thing I've worked with X-Acto knives for many years. I've learned not to cut myself. I always brush in between because I don't want any fabric or any kinds of dust bunnies or anything like that build up on the painting. First, I'm making sure that everything's lining up the way I want it before I start applying paint. There's always time to still erase if I needed to. But now it's time to paint. I've decided my colors ahead of time, which is always a good idea, so that way you can just straight work and not worry about things as you're doing it. And what I'm doing unusually with this piece, because it's such a small piece, normally I'll mix my colors on a separate palette, get all the detail, and I have to be very careful with the brushes. And I have a couple of different sizes of brush that I use for this particular piece. A bigger, wider brush on the outer edge, and then a smaller brush that I use for getting up close to the main focus subject so I can really work with the line carefully. I would have to say, as a painter, this is always my favorite part, applying the color, because then it really feels like it's coming to life. The blue of the ocean, and this time I'm making it particularly stormy. I believe that's cerulean blue that I chose, and putting it directly onto the canvas, I can blend it a little bit within itself before I add some highlights, which you'll see in a moment. This is also something that I find really fun. I like to blend colors to make them come more alive and have more depth. So by adding white to the blue, it just adds so many layers of blue at once. I chose a lime green for this, not only because it's one of my favorite colors, but green itself has always represented life to me. And with this particular piece, it's the representation of our will to live despite things that challenge us. That is not a blue drink. That is my water for me to rinse out my brushes. And of course, you see I didn't spill it out after using the blue. It does take a lot of time to get just the right shade you want. I used the palette because I wanted to mix the greens and yellows and whites together to make sure that I had the color correctly before I started applying it to the canvas. But as with all things, like I said before, you have to be flexible. So if it still doesn't come out exactly the shade I want on first contact, I can always add more to it on top and mix it in. The other thing I like about doing that is it adds extra dimension because it creates shading and it creates highlights. So adding extra color here and there helps it do that. Again, I've opted for a smaller brush size to make sure I can get into the fine detail of the dress itself. Always want to make sure to keep the lines well defined. This is where drawing and coloring in between the lines that we learned as a kid really comes in handy. And as you see the green dress progress to get closer to the finished product, I also have to be careful though not to make sure I put any paint where I don't want it. So I wipe off my hands to make sure I don't have any on my hands. The benefit of working also on a smaller canvas at this moment was because I can spin it around at a moment's notice to work on different sides and details. The painting medium I've chosen to do this painting in is acrylics. It dries so quickly I can move on to the next section with not too much of a long lag time. This is still working on some of the finer details of painting the white tabs that make it look like a paper doll dress, and also the white collar of the dress. This allows me to get the tiny bit of white paint on the tip of the brush and just work very finely. Finally, I'll tell you the name of the piece is called Paper Beats Storm. A not so subtle nod to rock, paper, scissors, and a continuation of my paper doll series. We are weathering the storm. And here it is, my final piece, Paper Beats Storm. I hope you enjoyed watching the video. Thank you.